Hi, this is Rick Harsh, editor of CoronaSounds.books and author of several books on various subjects, including war um, and politics. Um, I am on part three of my booktube on literature and war. It's taken me over a week for various reasons to get back. I was going to take some time to really look into the topic, and I was distracted though. I was distracted by war in Gaza, and one of the most cynical and frightening actually uh, turn of events occurred over the last week, during which the International Court of Justice, is that what it is? ICJ. Um, Found that there was cause to charge Israel with genocide, which is about as much as they could do. And a lot of people were upset that their recommendations, their semi orders, their unenforceable orders included um, everything but a ceasefire, basically. They did include one thing that Hamas would be very smart to arrange, and that's they said Hamas should return the hostages. And although Hamas is not a signatory to the Convention on the Holocaust, it would be a really good idea because they're not a state. They can't be a signatory, but it would be very smart of them to do it and say, yeah, that court, they're pretty sharp, pretty good. So we're going to release the hostages. Of course, that has to be arranged with intermediaries, and as we know, the Israelis have been very, very reluctant to make deals for hostages, in large part because they have um, a, a they're opposed to the to allowing hostages to be taken. We've heard the term Hannibal Directive many times, and we know that probably because of the Hannibal Directive, on October 7th, many Israelis who would have been hostages were killed by Israelis, uh, by tank and by Hellfire missile. And, this is um, not something much covered um, by what I don't know. There are many ways of calling it, but the Western media, let's say, although Western media has, as usual, a lot of great independent media outlets, and many of them have come up with a great deal of proof against Israeli charges, and just like, for instance, it didn't take long for them to say there were no beheaded people, babies or anything else. No one was beheaded on October 7th, and even the rape charges, which were predictable, and it took months for the Israelis to come up with the rape charges, and those have been debunked as well. Systematic rape during this attack, it doesn't make sense on the face of it when you consider what they were doing, and the sophistication of what they had done. They had uh, knocked out Israeli communications immediately, and so it was a successful military operation. And their task was to uh, take out as many military targets as possible, and to get as many hostages as they could get. And we have one case that's very well documented, and there are even videos of the Israelis shooting tank shells into a house in one of the kibbutzim that had 20-some Hamas fighters in it, along with about 20 Israelis, one of whom survived to say, it was an Israeli tank shell. And we also know that we have also seen video of one of the Israelis who was ordered to fire a tank shell into the house. And you also see destruction that could not have been caused by the weapons that were being carried by the Hamas soldiers who had RPGs at best. And so basically a international law-sanctioned military operation by Hamas, which won't be pretty, of course, and it also was a replica of many of the events that occurred in South Africa committed by the ANC in their struggle for freedom. Well, that's what happened on October 7th. And, of course, it does not justify the incredible brutality visited upon the Gaza Palestinians by Israel. But the court decided, that's genocide. I mean, they couldn't say that yet because it has to be tried. But because if a genocide is being committed, and it's likely to be a genocide and so on, or likely to end up genocidal, they have certain statements they can make. And they did tell the Israelis to cease fire. And they didn't say ceasefire. And that's good. I'm glad they didn't, because that's not the way that you normally speak. That became a sort of cliche. Ceasefire. We need a ceasefire. Well, a ceasefire doesn't end it. What we need is an end to the attack on Gaza. So I never liked the ceasefire anyway. But the accumulation of demands that the ICJ made would allow no more fighting in Gaza. And of course, the Israelis said before that they would not listen to the ICJ. They would not allow the ICJ to tell them what to do. And they would not stop no matter what the ICJ said, because the UN is anti-Semitic, of course. And but then the most fucking hideous next step was to bring out right away this accusation that 12 out of 13,000 UN workers in Gaza were guilty of aiding Hamas. And of course, if UN workers were aiding Hamas, that's really, really good publicity for Israel. And even though it's the number of people, if 12 people did indeed commit crimes and did work with Hamas, that's not very many. That's 12 out of 13,000. And immediately, the U.S., Australia, the UK, Italy, Sweden, maybe more countries stopped funding the UN, UNRWA. So it's as cynical as it gets, and it's very, very ugly, and it means that the ICJ's ruling is going to be ignored as we expected it would. And this is an out for the U.S. They don't have to do anything. And if you follow U.S. election politics, you'll see that they are not talking about Gaza at all. There's no guts. Nobody has the guts to say that this is an issue that a president will have to face, presidential candidate. Why won't they talk about it? Because they don't know which way it's going to go. I mean, if you corner now, Biden is president, so he's got to speak about it now and then, and he just basically has to mumble that, well, we're not going to, we're trying to get them to kill fewer, et cetera, et cetera. All complete nonsense. And so, how does this fit into the tale of literature and war, the subject of literature and war? Well, because this is because I if you recall, or even if you even watched one of my I think my introduction, this topic came about when somebody, a couple of people wrote to me that I should not mix politics and history with literature. And literature is about the human condition. Well, the human condition is a very elusive topic, but I would argue that I, as a human being, am affected by war, that I am degraded by the inhumanity of the Israelis in this case, and in other cases by other people, usually by the United States, because that's the country that I was born into, and it's been one of the deadliest regimes or imperium ever in the history of the world. And you got Henry Kissinger dying, and people are trying to figure out how many people is he responsible for having killed, and it's now up to 4 million. I don't know I don't know how they can figure out the numbers, but 3 or 4 million sounds about right to me when you include the Christmas bombings in Vietnam, and the slaughter in Bangladesh and East Timor. And I don't know how many people were actually killed in Chile, but a generation was completely traumatized. So it is a big part of the human condition, especially the ones directly involved in the war. The conditions in Gaza, as a matter of fact, for the humans there, is utterly miserable. And the number of dead is very low compared to what is coming, I believe. It's now 26 or 27,000 plus probably 6,000 or 7,000 buried in the rubble. And but nobody can really know how well, except the Gazans, how awful it is, how traumatizing it is to be under bombardment for 4 months. It's going on 4 months. Soon will be 4 months. And the children there, can you imagine? The one thing that we all know that's going on there in Gaza is the Israelis are telling people, you have to get out of this area because it's not going to be safe. But before they tell anybody that, they're already bombing it. And then as soon as they tell them to go somewhere, they bomb them on the way there. And this happened when they first notified people, go south of the Wadi Gaza. there were two main highways, and both were attacked repeatedly. Hundreds or thousands died on the way south, obeying Israeli orders. And since then, every single safe place that was designated a safe place by the Israelis has been bombed. In terms of region, I mean, there are certain houses. You may bomb a few city blocks, and there will still be a couple of buildings left. So they won't get every single one right away. But I just read today about bulldozers outside a hospital, probably in Khan Yunis, that bulldozed and killed 20 people. The bulldozers went over some tents. There's a little refugee tent camp in the hospital grounds. They bulldozed 20 people. It's hideous. So, war and the human condition. Well, the first thing I think of, and I may have mentioned this before, is that when you think about literature and war, probably most of you would say, well, what about the Iliad? And I'd say, yeah, but go back a little further. What about the Mahabharata? That one's really complicated and interesting, a massive book, and within which is the Bhagavad Gita, which is the pacifist Mohandas Gandhi's favorite book, or was. He's dead now. The book carries on. The book to buy, by the way, if you want to buy the Bhagavad Gita, by the Radhakrishnan translation and annotated translation. But that's about this thoughtful person named Arjuna, and peaceable person, who was tasked with going to war against his cousins, and he couldn't do it. He said, I can't. I mean, it's just wrong. And Krishna comes down and tells him basically that, in life, you have to be detached. You can't think of what you gain from your actions. You have to just do what's right. And how they managed to use a war to make that point, and it's a pretty astonishing read, and I think that's something that everybody should consider when they are interested in reading about war in literature. I recommend reading the Bhagavad Gita, reading about the Bhagavad Gita. Reading the whole Mahabharata is satisfying as well. It's an extraordinary piece of work, stories within stories within stories, and so on. But the main thing is, how do you have this important pacifist religious work that takes its starting point as a pause in battle that Krishna is sent down to, basically there's a ceasefire, and Krishna is down there to say, no ceasefire, Arjuna, you're going to have to do your job here. And of course it's a metaphor, but still, how it's pulled off, something to read about. And now I'm going to tell you, instead of trying to be comprehensive or even intelligent, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my favorite war books. And one of them is by a Slovene that I read twice in a row. Once I read it and I thought, this is amazing. And then I read it again immediately. That's a rare thing for me to do. This was it's Minuet for Guitar by Vitomil Zupan, spelled as I said it. And it's about World War II and the partisans fighting against Nazi Germany. And the Italians had the territory to within about today's driving distance, 33 minutes from Ljubljana. Ljubljana had a fence around it to keep people in, and our main character just walked out one day and joined the partisans. And what's so brilliant about that book, which I haven't reread for now over 20 years, is that it does a better job than anything I've read to get at the chaos and well, what they call the fog of war is brought to the fore. That nobody knows where anybody is. They're constantly getting lost, and I know the areas pretty well by now. Ljubljana was held by the Nazis, and not far from there, not far at all, the partisans were in several places, and they met usually on smaller mountains around Ljubljana, and that's where most of the fighting took place, as far as I recall. And the interesting thing about that historically is that the Slovene partisans were the first partisans. Tito was in a separate territory in Bosnia, but Slovenia was attacked first, and so they had the first partisans. And it's an amazing history, an amazing story. I've been in some of their underground hospitals and in the woods, and they were very, very clever. They were able to keep these places secret. They often used, the Nazis knew that there were field hospitals out there, and the Slovenes would actually lure Nazis towards them and ambush the Nazis. Great stories that came out of there. And so Vitomil Zupan's Minuet for Guitar, my #1 World War II book. And Catch-22 is another. It's not written down here in front of me. In fact, what I have written down in front of me is very hard to read because I wrote it by hand. And I had to, the one bit of preparation I did for this is to try to make out what I wrote. And I have, I can see Iliad and Bhagavad Gita and a couple others. I've figured out what they were. Latin American literature comes in large part. The greatness of Latin American literature derives from the condition of absurd dictatorship, and there have been many. It's a whole separate category of books about dictators. Garcia Marquez wrote one. The other Nobel Prize winner, what was his name? From Guatemala, El Señor Presidente, I think was the name of the book, but I forgot the name of the guy. Well, look him up. 1965, I think he won the Nobel Prize, and I really can't think of it. Anyway, the another one is I, the Supreme by Augusto Roa Bastos. I think there have been a couple by Mario Vargas Llosa, a writer who I find occasionally very noxious, but whose best two books are about war. One of them is The War of the End of the World, which is an absolutely astonishing and true story. The classic Brazilian piece of literature is actually a journalistic account of this same war, the end of the 19th century. Religious figure created a band of misfits, let's say, and the state went to to wipe them out, or stop them. I don't know what they were doing that would draw the attention of the state, but they were lawless. Maybe it was simply that. I don't know of crimes that they committed, but they maybe did. I don't remember. But Euclides da Cunha was the author, and his book was called Os Sertões. The translation in English is Rebellion in the Backlands, and Os Sertões is a translation of the Backlands. Sertões, it's a wild area in, well, Brazil's kind of, hard to place in terms of north and south because the Amazon, it's south of the Amazon, but if you cut out that part, it's to the northwest, São Francisco River and so on. And there are many books about that. João Guimarães Rosa wrote one, and I think it's recently been retranslated. The first translation was The Devil to Pay in the Backlands, which is a terrible translation, but a great book and about the Backlands. And I know there are others, but I can't recall what they were, what they are right now. So the other one is The Conversation in the Cathedral. And it's basically how, it starts with the question, how did Peru fuck itself up? And that's a political book which, cannot actually be written without a little bit of war thrown in. It's not really a war novel, but it's a very political novel. And then there's Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude. It begins with this famous sentence about Colonel Buendia, I believe. And it's about the generations of the Buendia family and 100 years of Colombian history. And so another war novel that's an all-time great. And I'm going to end, it looks like. I've only got one more. And this is one that is especially important to me. There's a Serbian writer, I think he's recently dead. He was alive during the wars of the 90s, the Balkan Wars, and very much criticized for being a Serbian nationalist. I don't believe that he committed any crimes. He may have been a propagandist. I don't know. But he had already written what was called The Serbian War and Peace. And it's sold, last I knew, if available in English, in 4 volumes with these bland titles like Land and Freedom and so on. And the titles themselves repelled me, and I don't know how I finally decided to read them, but I did, and it was the best war book of all that I've ever read. The Serbian War and Peace, about World War I. And I think if I were a literary critic, I would probably write an essay on comparing War and Peace and Chosic's massive novel, and talk about the difference in writing that was brought about by, I would say, this is probably one case in which I would say the advances in the sense of greater freedom in literary techniques. I believe he wrote these in the 50s, the 1950s, not sure. But I think that's what made his book stand out. Because after I read his books, I thought that was really good. I should probably read War and Peace. So the next summer, I read War and Peace, and I thought that Chosich's book was far superior. That isn't the last thing. I saw it in my notes here. Antonio Lobo Antunes. Outside of Joao Reis, one of our writers, we have one of his books. He's written at least 6 now, published in Portuguese, maybe 7. Unfortunately, only 3 in English. And I read the first one, and ours is the second one. The first one is The Translator's Bride, and he's a brilliant writer. But Antonio Lobo Antunes is one of those guys who every year he's on the Nobel Prize list, and he's written a number of books, and none of them really are about the colonial wars, the rebellions that were not put down. The Portuguese were really fucked in the late 60s, early 70s, and it was all absurd attempts by Salazar to hold on to his dictatorship and his colonial projects. And Antunes is extraordinary in that all of his books seem to have something to do with that fact of history and the psychological aspects, anything that you can do with a war novel, except put people in the situation and follow them through a whole novel. He doesn't do that ever, but you do get the effects of war on people over time, and the madness and the degradation again, the degradation caused by war, and the poverty left behind by war, the poverty carried to Portugal by those involved in the war, and the poverty of spirit and everything. Antunes is one of a kind. If you haven't read Behind the Ass of Judas, I can't remember what the Portuguese for that is, but that's the actual title of his Tavern Confession novel, which was first translated as South of Nowhere. A great translation. I don't know why they had to translate it again. Fado Alexandrino is another one. An Explanation of the Birds is another one. And in my bathroom, I keep a bunch of books, and I think I have about 8 of his in there. And I just one time I read one of them purely as a bathroom book, and I made it about 2/3 of the way through, and then I had all these others of his. And anyway, every bathroom should have an Antunes collection, I believe. So if I do more on this, I'll do it a more personal version, and I'll talk about my own books and war. I talked about Skulls of Istria, but I have several others that find that the political landscape and the the hideous nature of war and the involvement of the United States, my great country, the one that gave me birth and neurosis, is well, it's a topic that I can't escape because my own personal worldview has been shaped by in large part by the hypocrisy and deadly nature of the United States. And I suppose right now there's somebody in Israel saying the same thing. In fact, there are many historians in Israel saying the same thing. The great thing about democracies, and of course, Israel is not a full-blown democracy, and neither is the United States, of course. You have to have economic democracy. In the United States, it's not democracy if it's not economic democracy, which it will never be and never was. And in Israel, you have to have is it ethnic and religious democracy, or you don't have democracy. So neither are democracies, but among the elite in both countries are historians who are honest and write the truth about their countries. And so the United States was at the forefront of new left history that was able to make sense of Vietnam and speak plainly about it, just as in Israel, people like Ilan Pappé and who else? I don't know. There are several others. Historians are able to say, the Zionist project is, by its very nature, requires ethnic cleansing to be successful. So I did not intend to speak about Israel until I saw that that combination of events, the attempt to discredit the United Nations based on this something that they obviously waited for, and to spring on the world right after the ICJ ruling, which I'm sure they knew they were going to lose, and did badly, even though a lot of people say, shit, they didn't say ceasefire. Fuck ceasefire. End the fucking war. And so then to top it all off, bulldozing people alive. They bulldoze the dead as well. Something I'm not quite sure I understand. The cemeteries aren't flat enough. I don't know. But they've done a lot of that as well. Maybe they're afraid food will grow in a cemetery. Olive trees and grapevines. I don't know. Figs. I don't know what corpses produce, but it's ugly. It's really ugly. And that's it for today. And I can't believe I actually did this.